Thanks everybody. Thanks you everybody for joining to hear my talk about my bike for butterflies, 1,200 miles from Land's End to John O'Groats to raise money for butterfly conservation. Lovely to see some familiar names and faces on the attendee list. This is me at Land's End. Beautiful sunny weather with my flag on my bike. My flag got shorter, which you'll hear about. And you can see the flagpole there with the Lejog for butterflies. Lejog means Land's End, John O'Groats. What this picture tells you is that this post is put up there specially by the people who own the land at Land's End. And you have to pay money to go and stand in front of it and have your picture taken. And when they go away, they have a plain post without any adornments on it. So commerce has got to Land's End well and truly. Okay, so as I was planning, something I'd wanted to do for a long time, and I wanted to do it actually in 2020 and couldn't because of COVID. So when the opportunity came in 2021, I thought, now I'm going to go for it. Route planning was a major effort. And fortunately, Sustrans, the charity which does the National Cycle Network, had planned out a route that goes all the way on quiet roads and off-road. And I based my route on their route, modifying it to go through as many butterfly conservation and other reserves as I could. And after I completed it, my kids gave me this poster, which is an A3 size poster with all the stopover points marked, which I was rather pleased with. I also took with me my trusty I Spy butterflies and moths book and ticked off all the things I saw. And we'll talk about that as we go through. So that was good to have that route planning, which took a long time to do, to get the routes, to get the stopover points at the right places for the right distance. Because as you can see, 1,200 miles in 30 days is about 40 miles a day. Not huge distance by cycle touring standards, but I can tell you it was far enough for me. So this is me with my bike. I called my bike Ollie. I bought it especially for the ride, and I still ride it a lot now. And I named it Ollie after the oleander hawk moth, which I caught in the garden in Swanage and Dorset in 2018. And as you'll probably know, only about a dozen of those are seen in this country every year. So that was a special moment for me. And I thought the bike deserved a good name. So he was called Ollie. You'll see on the charts that I show you, there's in the top right-hand corner, there's a day number with a distance cycled and an elevation cycled. And this was a bit of a baptism of fire because I've done a lot of training through lockdown on the bike most days, but my training runs were about 35, 40 kilometers, so 20, 25 miles. And they're about 300 meters elevation. So on day one, I'm doing 86 kilometers, twice the distance, and 3 times the elevation. So it was a significant shock to the system to do this. But going through Cornwall is hard work, I can tell you, because all these steep river valleys, you go up and down, up and down, up and down. Anyway, lunchtime on day one, armed with a pasty from the local shop, I went to Upton Towans, a lovely nature reserve on the north coast by St Ives Bay. And it's what I call a post-industrial landscape because it used to be an explosives manufacturing place here, and the explosives were used for the mines in Cornwall, tin mines locally. And that led to a lot of sort of small dips in the landscape where they did trial explosions and so on. So it created a wonderful nature reserve, and it was peak time for silver-studded blues when I was there. So it's really a lift for the soul on day one to see so many silver-studded blues flying, and the odd small pearl-bordered fritillary and a few other things. And I was shown around by Dick Goodyear, the guy from Cornwall branch. So that was a lovely start. But as I was cycling through the countryside, I kept on seeing lovely road verges like this one. This is in Cornwall. And no butterflies, no insects, no buzz there. And I couldn't work out why. I tweeted, where have all the butterflies gone? And I concluded afterwards that this is probably because this is in a farmed landscape, lots of crops here, and it's probably pesticide drift into the field margins, just meaning there aren't any butterflies to be seen. So increasingly in the wider countryside, all the good wildlife areas are being confined to the nature reserves, and the farm landscape is getting less and less attractive for wildlife in general. That was a theme throughout the whole ride, in fact. Then on day 3, I was up on Bodmin Moor. A lovely cycle along the camel trail to get to Bodmin Moor, then steeply up onto the moor. And Sue, who's there on the call today, showed me around a site at St. Breward, where a lot of work's been done for the Marsh Artillery. This was legacy from the All the Moor Butterflies project, which ran until 2020 on the moors. And although it was quite wet weather, wet underfoot, I had to borrow some wellies. We did see some marsh frit, or a marsh frit, and see some eggs. And this is the egg on the underside of the leaf. And if you're eagle-eyed, you can see through the upper side of the leaf, you can see the shadow, which is one of the ways that we were spotting the egg patches on the underside. So this was a good day on Bodmin Moor with the Cornwall branch, and they kind of gave me a copy of their new Cornwall Butterfly Atlas, which was being published on the Saturday following my visit. And there was a ceremony to launch it. They gave me a copy, and I undertook to take it all the way to John O'Groats, and then I will auction it for charity when Butterfly Conservation has a charity auction again, and buy myself another copy. So that was an extra kilo of weight to carry all the way, which I thought was a good thing to do. This part of Cornwall and Devon was really beautiful, and here on the River Torridge going into Barnstaple on the Tarka trail. You cross the river several times on the trail, and it's absolutely beautiful. And this time I have good weather, but it looks brilliant weather, but actually there was a strong headwind, and I couldn't work out what had gone wrong, because I'm cycling from the southwest to the northeast, supposedly with a tailwind, the prevailing wind being from the southwest, but no, I had a headwind all the way, and it was killing. And this is where my flagpole got shorter, because as I was dismounting from the bike on the bridge to take this picture, I snapped off the pole halfway along. So the subsequent flagpole is half the height of the one I started with, which is probably a good thing, actually, because it's quite a drag to have it so tall. Then I got to Exmoor. This is fun enough. I was surprised this is the highest point of the ride. But as you'll see from this very short video clip, I was absolutely exhausted when I got here.
Wow, that was so tough. Hour and a half of continuous, relentless climbing on unforgiving hills to get to the top of Exmoor. Well, here now. But nature needs our help, so we've got to push on.
So I was doing little videos like that to tweet and go out as publicity to try and make people give me more money and sponsorship. But this was a very steep hill, and I did think I wouldn't make it at the time. And you can see 1,000 meters of climbing on this day. But it was lovely to be at the top and hear the skylark singing. So it was a pleasing to be there. And then I went on to the other side of Exmoor, actually over in the border into Somerset, to a reserve called, well, for Haddon Hill initially first, where I saw a solitary Heath fritillary, and then on to Haddon Moor, which is one of the few places in Somerset where the small pearl bordered fritillary is seen. And this is the BC reserve there. It's a smallish reserve, I think about 5 hectares. And you can see typically, the scrub encroachment, which is a problem on these type of places. So that was good to see, but that was down the hill off Exmoor, then right back up again to the top. So a lot of climbing on that day. And this is when the weather started to go bad on me. I'd stayed in Glastonbury the night before, having got lost on the way to Glastonbury, and ended up in about 10 miles in the wrong area in the rain. And then from Glastonbury to get to the top of the Mendips, where this reserve is, it's straight up the hill, Wookey Hole. If you know anything about the landscape there, that's a really steep hill. And I got to the top to enjoy the wonderful views, and this is what was there. Nothing, just a whiteout again. But there's a lovely reserve here at Westbury Beacon, and there's also Stoke Camp and a few others that are managed by other agencies like the Wildlife Trust, and reserves across the whole edge of the Mendips here, which are really important for all sorts of wildlife, not just the butterflies. So I was really sad that I couldn't take in the butterflies here, nor go to the large blue sites nearby Glastonbury because it just was teeming with rain, so no point. Then I'm into Bristol, and I went to a walk with some of the Bristol volunteers called the Narroways Millennium Green, which goes to an allotment as well. And it was a captivating site just on the north edge of Bristol. You can see the railway line going to the centre of Bristol there. And there were ringlets and wildflower meadows and a wonderful spread of corky fruited water dropwort flowers, which is a beautiful white flower. And this was, I wanted to do this one especially in memory of Maggie Moss, who championed wildlife in Bristol and walked this transect. And she sadly passed away in the March, I think it was, before last year, before the ride. And there's a lovely video, I won't play it now because it's 4 minutes long, which you can watch on YouTube, of her and why she set up the transect and why she thinks recording is important. But here is a snip from the video showing the type of habitat you've got in the centre of Bristol. So the lesson I'm taking away from this is that good wildlife habitat can be created easily in the centre of towns and cities. It just needs a bit of will and a bit of effort. And that theme will come back again later on. Then on to next day up into Gloucestershire, just north of Stroud, to the Rough Bank Reserve, where they had an open day, obviously with fairly limited numbers because of COVID. But this chap standing next to me in his suspended shorts and white shirt, he was, I think, 80 years old, and he did a lot of cycling in his youth that puts my efforts to shame. But they had moth traps where they caught some lovely moths, and a tours of the reserve, which was another very interesting reserve to see. And the Gloucestershire branch do a great job of managing it. This is a reserve, very steeply sloping chalk banks. And we did see some small blues and some other butterflies, but this reserve, you can get all the blue butterflies on this reserve, not the large blue, I don't think. But you can see pretty much all the blue species here. It's a great place to go. But looking across the valley to the other side, you can see the really severe ash dieback. So here's a landscape that's going to be transformed in the coming years as these ash trees fall and something else comes in their place. So real reminder of what ash dieback is going to do to our landscape in the coming years. And then went on to West Midlands. West Midlands is a branch that's fortunate to have a number of reserves, which they manage really well, like Gloucestershire do. We went into Monkwood, which is an ancient woodland reserve, quite reasonably sized, and we were lucky there to see wood whites, purple hair streaks, silver wash artilleries, white admirals. So it was lovely to be in a woodland reserve of such richness. And these wood whites are courting. It's a bit distant, but you can just see the courtship behaviour of the wood whites in the reserve here. I did try and blow it up, but it was not good enough resolution because I deliberately only took my phone with me. So all the pictures you see are taken with my mobile phone rather than a proper camera. There's the purple hair streak. That was a new emergence because this was about end of June, beginning of July. So quite early for this area. And Mike Williams, who's the ex-chairman of the branch, still a very active volunteer in West Mids, was a ride buddy for the afternoon, and he rode back from the reserve, Monkwood Reserve, to the place where I was staying with Mike Southall, the chair, and gave me hospitality for the night. Mike Williams hadn't cycled very much in the past few years, so it was as much a shock to his system as I think as it was to mine, but lovely to have company as we were for the 2 days and on the ride as well. And the next day was one of my tougher days and most enjoyable actually, because we went in the morning to Wyre Forest, and there's Mike Southall there with me in Wyre Forest, and we did some of the walks in the north end of Wyre Forest here. Saw some small pearl border fritillaries, silver wash fritillaries, and so on. Mike had some pheromone lures, and so we caught a number of clearing moths in no time at all with these lures. Fascinating to see how quickly they respond to the scent that they can pick up. So I spent all morning with these guys and left, I think, about 1:30 from Wyre Forest, and then set off to go to Wem, because the day after I was going to be at Priest Heath, which I'll tell you about in just a sec. But it was a much longer and much hillier ride to Wem than I had bargained for. So I passed the River Arley, River Severn at Arley at about 2:15, and didn't get to Wem until 7:30. And I was, as you'll see from this video, this was taken just as I arrived, and the weather had broken. It wasn't very good weather. I was a bit tired.
That was tough. Beautiful morning in Wyre Forest, walking, then a long, hard ride, very hilly than I've had before. It's 7:30. I've just arrived at my destination. I'm utterly exhausted. Whew.
Derek and Mary Sparks, who were my hosts for that night, were really kind to me, fed me up well, and got me prepared for the next day, which fortunately was a much lighter day in terms of cycling. And you can see Callum, I think, is on the call today, and it's his photo I've borrowed here. So sorry, Callum. We went to Priest Heath Common in Shropshire, the Butterfly Conservation Reserve. Callum was my ride buddy, which was fabulous. Callum was at that time in the Yorkshire branch, although moved to North Wales. And we arrived at Priest Heath Common to be met by Stephen Lewis, the reserve warden there, and it was damp, it was drizzling, coldish, and we were pretty downhearted because we didn't think we'd see any butterflies at all. But Stephen quickly took us onto the heath, and there were silver studs flying almost everywhere, and it was really joyous to see, a really emotionally lifting moment to see so many silver-studded blues. And this is a reserve with a really good history, because it used to be an airfield, and then it was agricultural land after the war. And in order to turn it back into heathland, they had to plough it to some depth to turn the soil over, plug, plant and seed with heath, heather, and it took years to come back. I think it's 15 years now since the acquisition. There's now a thriving reserve and a real example of what can be done, and a very important colony of silver-studded blues. Actually, it was a great day after the trials of the day before, and captured a couple of videos of the silver-studded blues. This is just an example of some of the flying that was going on. Newly emerged female being courted by several males. There were more flying this. This was the best video I could get. And then on the left-hand side, you can see a freshly emerged female, I believe, being tended by ants, which was, again, interesting to see. And obviously important to know how significant the ants are in these type of habitats and colonies. Then some tribulations near Manchester. It had to be Manchester, of course, because this was where I had torrential rainfall. I was looking for white leather hair streaks in Northwich, and I found the elms, and you can see the elms here with some Dutch elm disease affecting them, but it was literally teeming down. I was standing under a tree with the downpour, and just getting soaked. But of course, it was in Manchester that I stayed with a friend of mine, but my sat-nav that got waterlogged and died the night before. So I went to the shop to buy a replacement in the morning. It was Monday morning, and they said, "Oh, we got one. Yeah, got one. No problem. It's £350." I said, "Well, have you got something else?" They said, "We've got this phone holder." I said, "How much is that?" £20. Okay. Has it got a waterproof cover? Yes, there's one here. Okay, I'll take that then. So I had my phone in this phone holder with a waterproof cover. The only problem was the cover was thin, and the rain was so heavy that the raindrops are falling on the cover and turning the phone off. And then I had to debate, do I get the phone out in the rain and try and turn it back on again? Or do I chance my luck in terms of trying to go without any sat nav? So it was not the best day. But then I came across a gate like this, which is called an accessible gate, because I believe it's good for wheelchairs. But when you've got a bike with heavy panniers on the back This is not the thing you want to see when it's pouring with rain. As I said, it had to be Manchester, didn't it? That day I was, as I went north from Manchester, I was due to be meeting Jane Jones, who's on the call, in a park called Phillips Park in the north of Manchester. It was absolutely tipping it down. My sat nav was not working so well because I just explained on how the phone holder was deficient. And so I proudly arrived at Phillips Park and called Jane and say, I'm here. Jane said, well, I'm here too. Where are you? And we tried to explain where we were. And I realized I was in the wrong Phillips Park. Didn't realize there were two Phillips Park, one in Manchester and one in Prestwich, I think, where I should have been. And that was 10 miles away. So, and we were due to be meeting each other to cycle to Accrington, which is a reasonable distance north of Manchester. So in the end, we agreed that I would cycle direct from where I was to Accrington. And it's quite a hilly ride, and lovely ride actually. And we got to this wildflower meadow at Milnshaw Park, which had been created as part of the Hyndum Butterfly Project. And two volunteers from the Lancashire branch, Chris and Gemma, had created this wonderful wildflower meadow, about the size of a couple of tennis courts, maybe 3 tennis courts, I don't know. But they'd got a grant for a couple of £1,000 and arranged a digger to scrape off the topsoil, put the topsoil at the far end where all the nettles are growing now. You can see it just in the far distance. Seeded with proper wildflower seed. And 2 years later, they had 18 species of butterfly recorded, including some new to the site, new to the area. So a real example, like the Bristol example, of what can be done if you've got the will, the time and the knowledge to do it. But wildflower meadows are probably one of the easiest ways to improve biodiversity in urban parks. Jane was very kind to me, put me up and fed me well for the next day, which is what Jane called the up and over day. When I went into the Forest of Bowland, which is a big hilly area just north of Accrington. And this is where I learned about Coronation Meadows. I hadn't heard of them before, surprisingly enough. But at Sladeburn, there's the Coronation Meadow for Lancashire. And Coronation Meadows were created in memory of the Queen's 60th Jubilee, 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago, 2012. And the idea was there'd be some of the best examples of wildflower meadows in the county, be one per meadow. And then the idea is that the Coronation Meadow has babies. Seed is taken from these meadows to create other wildflower meadows and areas elsewhere in the county. And this Coronation Meadow in Belsykes Farm, I think, had 86 meadows created from it with seed. So wonderful area. And there was one meadow here which is original, and half a dozen others which have been created. And you can see me cycling there in my kind of day glow wet weather gear, which was obviously proving essential at this point. This is a lady from the AONB, I think, who's showing me around the meadows. Then over the top of the Forest of Bowland, up to the Cross of Greet, as it's called, 420 odd meters above sea level. It's a beautiful ride there, but if I remember correctly, into a strong headwind, which seemed unfair. When you're going uphill anyway, you don't want a headwind as well. But the weather cleared, and on the way down at the other side, it was beautiful and sunny, and fortunately got to my destination without any hazard. So that was a lovely day in Lancashire. And then I'm into Cumbria, and I visited the Myers Allotment Reserve. It's a 7 hectare, I think, reserve in the Silverdale area of Morecambe Bay, and the Cumbria and Lancashire branch. It's actually in the Lancashire branch, I think. Had a 10th anniversary celebration for the reserve, moth trap, walk around, gifts to the key volunteers, and so on. Really magical place. And there's a view over towards Leighton Moss, which is a RSPB reserve, where I think the large heath is still present. So unfortunately, the high brown fritillary is hard to see in the Silverdale area now. So I was advised to go across further to the east to a site called Holm Stinted Pastures, a lovely name. On the right there is a high brown that was caught just to prove, and released, I hasten to add, just to prove that we had a correct sighting, because dark greens were flying at the same time, dark green fritillaries. And I asked what the problem was about why the high brown's having such a hard time in the Silverdale area, and I was told it's farming in Northern Ireland with lots of fertilizer use, and the fertilizer nitrogen compounds come across the Irish Sea and get deposited in the rainfall in this part of Lancashire and Cumbria, and it enriches the soil, because what you should be seeing underneath the bracken is dead bracken litter, which provides a warm microclimate for the caterpillars to bask on in the spring. But when it's too fertile, grass starts to grow here, and it cools the habitat down, and the high brown fritillary can't cope with that. The dark green fritillary can, but not the high brown. So yeah, lots of issues there. That was lovely to see a high brown fritillary. I hadn't seen one for many years. And then I played a bit of hooky. Chris Winnick, who's the chair of Cumbria branch, who was kind enough to put me up in Kendal, took me to Whitbarrow area, Cumbria, in the morning of day 17. And we went to 4 sites around Whitbarrow, which is a captivating site. One of them, White Scar, a limestone quarry. We saw northern brown argus, grayling, small bordered fritillary, and so on. So lovely to see. But the northern brown argus is a potential problem in the north of England now, because it's the brown argus is moving its range northwards, and in parts of Yorkshire at least, it's overlapping with the northern brown argus. So there's a concern that the two might interbreed, and the northern brown argus might suffer greatly as a result. This is a lovely area and one worth coming back to, and Cumbria is a really great place for butterflies. Chris had told me that there's a colony of white-letter hairstreaks in the car park at Sainsbury's in Kendal, so I popped in, and I managed to find the elm trees at the back of the car park and hung around for 20 minutes or so, and there were white letters flying at the top of the trees. I spent so much time playing hooky, I had to cycle a bit to find a more direct route to go north from here. So I took the A6, which was not on the original plan, but all the heavy traffic, heavy goods traffic, and most of the vehicles, in fact, now follow the M6. So this was actually quite a nice ride up the A6 to the top of Shropshire. This is a view back down the valley from the top, and much more, I wouldn't say relaxing hill climbing, but the hills are much more gentle than they are in Cornwall, despite being taller. Then you see funny signs as you go past on the road. But on the way into Carlisle, there was a roadside verge in the park, and it was full of creeping thistle and full of small tortoiseshells and meadow browns and things as well. No peacocks. I was too early for the peacocks, I think, but the small tortoiseshell was doing really well there, which I was interested to see, because I don't see them very much in London and in Surrey, where I'm from. So it was really nice to see lots of small tortoiseshells, and freshly emerged, obviously, as you can see. Then I was cycling north went past, as I was chatting to people before, past Lockerbie and into Glasgow eventually. And this is in the country park just south of Glasgow in Hamilton. And this is one of the most depressing sights that I had on the whole trip, really, because I thought, why, this could be such a wonderful wildflower meadow if only they wanted it to be, and they've mown it in nice straight lines instead. And I know it's a historic view and there's reasons for it to be this way, but I thought this is such an opportunity missed that could have been a real good wildlife habitat, and it's not. It's just sterile grassland. But there is hope, because in Glasgow and southern Scotland there is a project by Butterfly Conservation called Helping Hands, and Anthony McCluskey has been working on that. I met him later at Killin, in fact, further north. He wasn't able to be with me as I visited these places because he was working elsewhere on the project, but I went to 3 of the parks where they've been working, and really good progress made on creating wildflower meadows. And you can see how rich, particularly the one on the left, is in terms of the birchfoot trefoil and the knapweed and everything else that's there. Bad weather, so not much flying, but nonetheless, really good work bringing wildlife into the center of the city and getting the local populations to engage with it and understand what can be done. But as I was going north, people were telling me that they didn't used to see the ringlet butterfly in their area. Chris in Cumbria said we didn't have the ringlets before 2012, and the same was said to me in Scotland. And the records show a slightly different story, but they clearly show that the distribution was much more limited previously than it is currently, because the orange dots are the more recent distribution, and since that 2014 date, it's spread even further. And it's now one of the commonest summer butterflies in Cumbria and Scotland. So I think that's definitely a climate change impact that's allowed the ringlet to move north, and it's got habitat it can move into easily. So off it goes. I then went over to the Stirling area, and there's a reserve there called Wester Moss, which is a raised bog reserve, and it's supposed to be really wet and full of cotton grass, and it's struggling a bit, to be honest, because despite lots of work by volunteers in a project called Bog Squad, it's drying out, and something to do with the geology underneath, I think, is causing it to dry out. And there's not much cotton grass there, and we were looking for the large heath, and we didn't see it at all. And it's really worrying that the scrub is encroaching, the birch is encroaching onto the reserve. So it needs a lot more work, and that's going to be hard to do, I think. But then we went on to, next to the reserve is a hill called Fallin Bing. And if you don't know what a bing is, I had to learn it myself. It's an artificial coal heap that creates a hill 50 feet or so high. So not particularly tall, but a very poor quality soil, a very infertile soil, and very florally rich on top. You can see the richness of grasses and plants there. And of course, then the penny starts to drop. These infertile soils, like on the Bing, on chalk and limestone grasslands and so on, and wildflower meadows that are working well. It's because the soil is not fertile that the wildflowers are growing well, and the heavy grasses are inhibited from growing. So this is a view towards Stirling on the left, and you can see Stirling Castle, magnificent on the outcrop of the rock there. And on the right, you can see Wester Moss is the brownish area in the middle, and you can see how it's enclosed by trees, and how those trees are almost sort of marching inwards onto the reserve, and that's a real concern. And here are some examples of what was visible at the top: burnet moths, antler moths, and just birdsfoot trefoil coming out of your ears, and common blues there as well. So a real treat to visit, and thoroughly enjoyed that. Then I was going north, further on to, not far north, to Callander, a nice town on the river there, beautiful riverside views, and I managed to get the last ice cream from the ice cream machine before it broke, and the little girl after me was a bit sad that I'd eaten my ice cream and she couldn't get one, but it was gone by then. But I had to treat myself. And they had some nice wildflower meadows as well. So the wildflower meadow theme comes back again and again. And looking on the left, and I just turned around and looked to the picture on the right, and you can see how the mown areas are just sterile, and how the unmown areas have got richness of habitat. So it's not difficult to do if we really want to. Then I met Anthony McCluskey in Killin, and we looked for some purple hair streaks unsuccessfully because it was pretty windy that night. But he said, we're talking about Ben Lawers, which is a national nature reserve where the mountain ringlet is resident. And he said it's a bit of a hill. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. Lovely day. This is the reserve here, and you can see that wooded area. There's an exclosure around the reserve, a fence. And this is what happens inside when the deer can't get to the vegetation, and outside when they can. So it's completely transformed what's inside the reserve. It's quite a large reserve, but it was an arduous ride up. You can see you get up and then up. Looks almost vertical, and it felt like that, to the car park. Another 200 meters up on foot as well to see, and I managed to see one mountain ringlet, which I was really pleased with. And they're flying alongside ringlet butterflies. So it's not the easiest job to distinguish one from the other, because you're seeing so many ringlets and not many mountain ringlets. And the story of the mountain ringlet is kind of the opposite of the ringlet, really. This is one which is our only mountain species, lives above 350 meters in Scotland and a bit higher than that in England. And it's because of the warming climate, it's having to retreat upwards, and at some point it'll have nowhere to go. So quite worried about what might happen to this butterfly as climate change progresses further. And we know there's more warming to come, but even if we get things under control in the longer term. So it's a worry. This is the view from Ben Lawes, and you can see down to Loch Tay, absolutely stunning scenery. And I think the large heath is here as well, but I didn't see any. But lovely views from Scotland, absolutely stunning. Then I was on my way to Pitlochry, and I couldn't resist this sign. Firstly, there was a town called Dull, and secondly, someone had the good sense and humour to pair it with between it with Boring in Oregon. So I thought it was great. And you can see this was the scenery I was encountering at that time, and certainly not dull and certainly not boring. Some stunning scenery. On that same day, as I was having that lovely sunshine, this is what was happening in Europe. Do you remember the catastrophic floods in Germany and the Netherlands, and the deaths that came with those? And this is the part of the price of climate change that we're paying now. These sort of things getting more common, and goodness knows what's going to happen in coming years. Then progressing further north, this is the highest point on the National Cycle Network in Scotland, 462 meters. So not far off the peak in Exmoor, another 20 meters up from that. But as you can see, the roads are relatively quiet, and they're relatively gentle in terms of the gradient. So that makes a lot of difference as you're climbing compared with Cornwall. And then I met Pete Moore from Scotland branch at Inch Marshes, and we had a good walk around there in Strathspey. Absolutely captivating place. And Pete told me the story, and we walked around and we looked for some rare moths without success again. I was due to be staying with Tom Prescott in Kingussie, which is right next door to this. He'd unfortunately been pinged with COVID and had to isolate. So Pete stepped in at the last minute and gave me accommodation, which was really kind of him. But that was a Grand Town-on-Spey, which is sort of 20 miles further to the east. So he met me here, and we drove with my bike to his house. Then he drove me back in the morning, so I could start from the same place and not gain any miles unofficially, which is really kind. And then on the way to Inverness, another hill, lovely bridge at Carbridge. This is a packhorse bridge, and I'm not sure I'd want to take a packhorse across it, but still. And then up to the summit. This is my last hill above 400 meters. But I had consecutive days of climbing and long rides, and I was getting pretty tired. And I was coming into Inverness, where I was due to be staying in a hotel in the middle, and I got a panic call from Mary Eagleson, who was my ride buddy for the next day. And I was at these Neolithic cairns when I took the call, and she said, "Simon, you can't stay at that hotel you've got booked. It's not good." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "It's not a proper hotel, it's a hostel. And I've been told it's full of COVID and druggies, and you really can't stay there. You must come and stay with me instead." So I said, "Oh," I said, "That's really kind," and said, "Okay, fine, thank you very much." She said, "I live just north of Inverness. Husband will drive me down with my bike, and then I'll cycle you back to my place." That's what happened. I met her at the battlefield of Culloden, and we cycled across Keswick Bridge. This is not my photo, but it was terrifying. It was blowing a gale, and we were about, felt like 100 feet above the water. I don't think it is quite that high, but every time we went past one of the poles, wind would grab you and push you to the side. So there was no risk of falling off because there's a nice high fence, but it was terrifying nonetheless. What Mary hadn't told me was another 35 kilometers to get to her place from where I got picked up. So by the time I got there, which made it the longest day, and I was utterly exhausted when we arrived at her place. But really kind of her to put me up and look after me so well. And then next day she was my ride buddy on the way to Leg, which was another 100k cycle. And we cycled along the Cromarty Firth, which is where they keep all the oil rigs they're not using. They store them there because it's a nice deep firth, to a place called Cromarty at the end. There's a little ferry which goes across to Nig on the north side. And you may think that this car is driving onto the ferry. It's not. This ferry takes 2 cars and it's driving off, has to reverse off. And this one, I should have taken pictures later on because it nearly drove off the slope into the sand. But we did some butterflying on the north coast at Nig Sands. Saw quite a few species of butterfly actually, and my one and only small copper for the trip was seen here. So that was really good. And this was the longest ride again. And we stopped on the way at Ardguy to look for Scotch Argus at the community wood here. It was apparently good Scotch Argus habitat, but a week too early. I think some had been seen that day or the day after, but we didn't see any, and I didn't see any Scotch Argus. It was just following me up as I went north. It was seen further south. There's me with Mary setting out for the day that day. So that was my last company for the ride as we got to Leg, and I then struck out across the flow country, the blanket bog of northern Scotland, Caithness and Sutherland, to the north up to the north coast. There's a lot of nothing up there, but it's stunningly beautiful. And just in the distance on the left-hand side, you can see the Crask Inn, which is supposed to be the most isolated pub in Britain. Stopped there for coffee in the morning. And north from the Crask Inn, I was going up to Altnahara and then up Strathneva here, which is a deviation from the original route because I couldn't get any accommodation on the planned route. And this is Lochnaver, again, beautiful area. This is where, if you know your Scottish history, a lot of the Highland clearances were made in the 1800s, brutally cleared the land of the farmers. I stayed at Weehoo's Glamping at this point, which are little pods, and it wasn't the most luxurious glamping, but it was certainly good enough. And waking up to the views and the views of the Munros from the camp was absolutely lovely. It was not quite camping, but it was really nice to do. And then I went up to right at the north of the north of Scotland now. And this is by Dunnet Beach and another Coronation Meadow. This one in Burn of Midsand. So I was pleased to tick off another one of these. Unfortunately, it was 14 degrees and mizzle here, so nothing to see, and pretty cold to stop and hang around. But I did go on and get to Dunnet Head, the most northerly point of the mainland of Britain. Dropped my phone and cracked the screen at this point for my sins, but and no view to speak of. But pleased to have done that. And then we are finally at John O'Groats, and there's me with the Butterflies of Cornwall Atlas, and proudly with my bike. And I'd say it was cold and chilly, and I was hoping to see a butterfly, to do a big butterfly count at the John O'Groats, but I didn't. I'd had a Red Admiral on the day I set off from Land's End, but nothing here, sadly. Here's some of the numbers about the ride. There's one of my flags. You can see 1,200 miles, 19 kilometers of ascent, of course 19 kilometers of descent as well, which is, I guess, pretty good. 40 wildlife sites or more, 34 species of butterfly. I was hoping for more than that, but weather got to me in a number of places, and between the broods in other cases. 7 BC reserves, 7 very generous hosts put me up, 6 ride buddies, 2 very tired legs, and no punches at all, which was really pleasing. But no peacocks either, which was quite alarming. So just before I close, what did I learn? The first is, don't be afraid to ask for help. Mary helped me out, which saved my bacon. Have faith in yourself, because there's things you can do which you don't believe. You have to plan, but you also have to let it be. And Stephen Lewis from Priest Heath was kind enough to send me YouTube clips of songs like "Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head" and so on, which to cheer me up as I was going along. It made a lot of difference to have that sort of interaction. Remember, it's about the journey, and there's never any shame in using a lower gear. And finally, there's always a headwind. I learned that, and I learned to actually quite like hills and quite hate headwinds. And this is just a road in the flow country. Next time, what would I do? Carry less stuff. I did send 2 packages home. I'd take some rest days. I didn't have any rest. I'd do more training. I'd spend more time in the green spaces, and I'd take more photos. And there may be a bike for butterflies too in this summer. Starting at Inverness, going down to Oban and then to Campbelltown, down the Great Glen, hop over to Mull and Col and Tyree, see the maca habitat on these islands, go across to Ardrossan here and go down to Dumfries and then Carlisle and see maybe Forest. So that's what I may do this summer, who knows. So many people to thank. Local voice, we got the people from Gloucestershire here and the people from Lancashire and Cumbria, and in fact Martin Partridge from Yorkshire was there too at Myers allotment. Local volunteers, all the BC members who put me up, all the people who donated, all the ride buddies, people who supported me, people at head office, the National Cycle Network itself, and Richard at Oxford Bike Works, who created such a good bike for me to ride at relatively modest expense. And we raised over £30,000. And donations are still welcome should you want to, but this talk isn't about that. And that's it, and that's where I shall end it. Thank you very much for listening, and we've got time for questions now.